welcome to the Library of Virginia. So pleased that you are here with us. Hope not too many of you had any trouble with the parking. It still is that season with the General Assembly, but we thank you for venturing out anyway. My name is Tamika Hobbs. I'm the Program Education Manager here, and we're very glad to welcome today Martin Clagett, who will be talking to us about his book, Scientific Jefferson. But while I have your attention, this event is one of a series of book talk programs that we offer here at the library, and I wanted to let you know about a special program we have coming up next week. Next Monday evening, we'll be hosting the book launch for Tim Cochran's book, Trust Building, an honest conversation on race, reconciliation, and responsibility. Many of you may know Rob. He's the founder of the Hope in the Cities phenomenon. There is a branch here in the city of Richmond. And he's written this book, and a foreword was actually penned by our former governor, Tim Kaine, who's planning to be here on next week to introduce him. So it should be a wonderful affair next Monday, March the 15th, starting at 5:30. And immediately before the talk, we're going to be honored by several selections, I should say, from the One Voice Chorus. So it should be a full-packed event. And we hope that you come back to join us. There will be a reception following that talk. With that, I'm going to bring up now our senior editor here at the Library of Virginia, Brent Tarter, who will do the honor of introducing today's speaker.
Thank you, Tamika. Welcome, everybody. Martin Clagett is going to be speaking today about a new book. I've known Martin for a good many years. He comes in here and does research, and we sit around and have lunch and talk shop. People think we're lawyering, but we really are talking shop. It's a noisy, fun kind of talk. Martin's interests are broad, and he looks for connections in interesting ways. Once upon a time, I won't say a good many years ago, once upon a time, Martin did a doctorate in education at Virginia Commonwealth University, and his dissertation topic was William Small, whom almost nobody's ever heard of. Scholars of the College of William and Mary and people who know Thomas Jefferson instantly recognized the name. Was Jefferson's favorite professor at the College of William and Mary. That interest in William Small as an educator led Martin into a wonderfully varied and interesting set of interconnected investigations. Small came out of the Scottish Enlightenment. He influenced Jefferson. Small went back to Great Britain, where he was associated with some of the most important and inventive figures in the Industrial Revolution. So the connection of the English and the Scottish Enlightenment and the American Revolution and the Industrial Revolution in England has suddenly fallen together in Martin's very strange mind into a series of interconnected inquiries that offer a lot of hope for understanding the international community in which people like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and others who were founding fathers of the United States were engaged throughout their entire lives. As a consequence of this research, he's been all over the place and spent time doing research in England and Scotland as well as here. He's held a Gilder Lehrman Fellowship at the International Center for Jefferson Studies at Monticello. Is a visiting scholar at the James Wilson Program at the University of St. Andrews, and is currently a fellow of the Omohundro Institute of Early American History and Culture at the College of William and Mary. He's here today to talk about this. This book came out just late last year, Scientific Jefferson Revealed. Martin Clagett.
Thank you, Brent. As Brent was saying, I first started off with William Small, and it led me into both the world of science and the world of Scottish Enlightenment and its connections to the American founding fathers. The Earhart Foundation generously provided me with funds to go to Scotland to do 3 months' worth of archive diving. And while I was in Scotland and Edinburgh at the National Archives, looking for William Small material. At the same time, I was looking for James Wilson material, but ran into this Franklin poem that he wrote for himself. And except for the line about the lightning rod, it could be easily applicable to Jefferson as well. This fellow here is Charles Wilson Peale, a scientific friend of Jefferson's and also a great artist of the time and a prolific portrait artist. He was also something of a Barnum, P.T. Barnum, in that he used his interest in natural philosophy or botany and flora and fauna and a natural historian is sort of a showman. And it's my hope that Scientific Jefferson Revealed, the book, is like Peale's promotional portrait in that it will bring a fresh perspective and an avenue of seeing again a side of Jefferson that, like Franklin's poem, brings attention to an aspect of Jefferson that is often neglected. Many historians of science dismiss Jefferson as a dilettante dabbler in gadgets and gizmos, hardly an appropriate description for a man who produced the most important scientific work by an American in the 18th century, Notes on the State of Virginia, who pioneered techniques in archaeological excavation, stratification, who has been called the father of American paleontology, who compiled the most extensive collection at the time of native languages, who invented the mole-bore plow of least resistance, the cipher wheel, who followed David Rittenhouse and Benjamin Franklin as the third president of the American Philosophical Society. Some even complain that the word scientist was not coined until the 1840s, and the Oxford Universal Dictionary describes scientist as a man of science, but arose by any other name. And the two greatest contemporary authorities on the Scottish Enlightenment, science in the Scottish Enlightenment, are Roger Emerson and Paul Wood. Their description of a man of scientist, or really a man of science or a scientist, is the following. And a man of science we define as someone who can either be identified as part of an audience for science or someone who participated directly in the production of scientific knowledge. Under the rubric of production of scientific knowledge, we include authorship of a text, engagement in observational experimental practices, development of theory, or acquisition and transmission of relevant forms of technical expertise. By science, we denote fields embraced by natural history, natural philosophy, medicine, and a cluster of subjects which contemporaries grouped under the headings of mathematics and the arts of instrument making that apply to such natural knowledge. Jefferson fits to a T all these descriptions that Emerson and Wood put forth for a man of science. Jefferson's early life and education. From infancy, Jefferson was surrounded by the wonders of nature, and much of his youth was spent in observation and contemplation. Convinced that in order to progress with his studies, it was necessary to begin his collegiate career in Williamsburg, he wrote his guardian, John Harvey, the earliest letter we have of Jefferson's, on 14 January 1760, requesting that he be sent to William and Mary, where I shall get a more universal acquaintance, which may hereafter be serviceable to me, and I suppose I can pursue my studies in Greek and Latin as well there as here, and learn something of mathematics. It's interesting to note how grounded that Jefferson was in mathematics. In his earliest letter, he mentions wasting a quarter of his time up at Monticello by constant visitors. When his brother-in-law and close childhood friend, Dabney Carr, died, he watched the grave diggers and figured out and wrote down by calculation at the speed that the ditch diggers were going, how long it would take them to dig down 6 feet for an acre. Later in life, when he was opposed generally to women going to school, and his own daughter was educated, somebody asked him, how do you explain this difference? Why are you educating your daughter? And he said, well, in case the husband dies, the education of the children will be left all to the mother. And I calculate a 1 in 16 chance that she'll marry a knucklehead. So he was branded and mad throughout his life. In 1757, violent conflicts over politics, money, and control of power in the college led the Board of Visitors to dismiss virtually the entire faculty, which then consisted of a professor of moral philosophy, a professor of natural philosophy, a professor of divinity, and the grammar school master. Only the master of the Indian school, who recanted his opposition to the visitors, and the frequently intoxicated president remained. New professors of moral philosophy and natural philosophy and a grammar school master were recruited from England and installed in their posts by the fall of 1758. In the case of 2 of the employees, the medicine was more deadly than the disease. Professor of moral philosophy, Jacob Rowe, and the grammar school master, Garoni Owen, were soon publicly espousing those same radical viewpoints that caused the termination of their predecessors. In addition, they not only displayed a fondness for carousing, cursing, public drunkenness, defying the visitors, starting fights with the Tammies, but also recruited students to join in their extracurricular activities. In the spring of 1760, a mock battle occurred of such a massive scale between these 2 professors and their student followers and the locals that it was even made the papers in London. The visitors decided enough was enough. Rowe was dismissed. Owen quickly tendered his resignation, leaving Small as the professor of natural philosophy, as the only collegiate professor at William and Mary. So Small, this is just as Jefferson was arriving. So Small was not only Jefferson's favorite professor, he was his only professor. In his autobiography, Jefferson wrote of William Small, "It was my great good fortune, and probably what fixed the destinies of my life, that Dr. William Small of Scotland was then professor of mathematics, a man profound in the most useful branches of science, with a happy talent of communication, correct and gentlemanly manners, and an enlarged and liberal mind. He, most happily for me, soon became attracted to me and made me his daily companion when not engaged in school. From his conversation, I got my first views of the expansion of science and of the system of things in which we are placed." This portrait of Small was painted by the acclaimed artist Tilly Kevin, and it mysteriously appeared at an auction house in Maine in 2005. The people both at Monticello and William and Mary asked me to confirm the sitter as Small, and I am no art expert, but I did some research on it, and it now hangs in the office of the president of the College of William and Mary. How it turned up in Maine 2 centuries later, its interesting history, and why it sold for a measly $5,000 are all stories for another time. Small was a true product of the Scottish Enlightenment. He was born in a small hamlet between Dundee and Arbroath called Carmeliff. In this picture is a church of where his father preached, and the house that they lived in is long ago fallen down. But there's a replacement there. He went to grammar school at Dundee Grammar and proceeded to Marshall College, which was one of the most scientifically advanced universities in Britain. Small's professor of natural philosophy at Marshall was William Duncan, the famous author of the Elements of Logic, which became the touchstone for Thomas Reid's School of Common Sense Philosophy. And the School of Common Sense Philosophy was called by Donald Meyer as the official metaphysics of the American Revolution. And the self-evident proofs as the bedrock of deductive logic. Small's mentor was John Gregory, and his cousin was Thomas Reid. They founded the Aberdeen Philosophical Society, and very much of its program was scientific emphasis, well, exclusively scientific emphasis and inquiries, and it was likely the inspiration for the intellectual society that Fauquier formed in Williamsburg, the Parte Poire, as Jefferson called it, later the Birmingham Lunar Society, and also had implications for the American Philosophical Society. Shortly after Small's departure for the colonies, Gregory became professor of medicine at the University of Edinburgh, and Reid followed Adam Smith as professor of moral philosophy at Glasgow. Now, in those times, in the Scottish Enlightenment, moral philosophy also included law. So law was a big part of moral philosophy, and not just rhetoric and bell-let and things of that nature. In Williamsburg, among Jefferson's friends and classmates who played major roles in the Revolution and the New Republic were John Page, James McClure, and Benjamin Harrison. The story is told that Jefferson, Page, and Small often made astronomical observations from a cupola on the roof of the Page estate, Roseboro. These early experiments, initiated by Small, led to the advances of many branches of science in the New Republic. Fauquier, Randolph, Wythe, and Small acted as surrogate fathers to Jefferson in Williamsburg. Fauquier founded a scientific society styled by Jefferson as the Party Poire. The permanent members were Fauquier, Wythe, Small, and Jefferson. Jefferson at first was brought along to play the fiddle, and the other participants soon found that they enjoyed his conversation much more than his fiddle playing, and brought him into the permanent group. Like the Aberdeen Philosophical Society before, topics of discussion were determined beforehand and emerged from conversations at hand. Like the Birmingham Lunar Society later, which was co-founded by Small, there was a core group of participants who would invite informed friends to participate on the evenings when topics of their expertise were to be discussed. Jefferson would later say, at these dinners I have found more good sense, more rational and philosophical conversations than in all my life besides. Peyton Randolph and Fauquier were also instrumental in founding a scientific club for the general public called the Society for the Encouragement of Arts and Manufacture in 1759, which conducted experiments and offered rewards for inventions with practical applications for arts and sciences. Chemicals, electric observations, meteorological recordings and exchange of plants. The Royal Society were the most frequent subjects investigated. New information that I discovered while I'm at William and Mary doing a book on William Small right now, and new information strongly suggests that Jefferson did not leave William Small's tutelage in 1762, but continued until Small left in 1764. It's very likely that Small and Whip, from records in the Virginia Gazette, had a ad hoc grad school put together, and it may even be possible that Whip was training American lawyers for American law as opposed to British law pre-1765 and the Stamp Act. In 1762, the House of Burgesses, likely at Fauquier's urging, awarded £450 for the purchasing of proper apparatus for instruction of students at Sid College in natural and experimental philosophy. In 1964, Small was sent to England to choose and obtain the instruments. The inventory for the collection provides good indications of both the range and interest of Small and his students. The list includes apparatus for making experiments in various branches of science. There were electrical machines and Leyden jars for electrical demonstrations, balances for statics and hydrostatics, barometers for meteorology, air resistance measurements for pneumatics, quicksilver and compasses for magnetism, telescopes, reflecting mirrors for astronomy, solar microscopes and prisms for botany, optics, and medical subjects. Also, a variety of less exotic and sophisticated demonstrating subjects. Jefferson pursued a wide variety of scientific interests, several of which are in this slide. Among the subheadings into which the book Scientific Jefferson is divided is agriculture, archaeology, anthropology, ethnology, comparative linguistics, paleontology, social architecture, and public health, and scientific spine. Although from his childhood Jefferson had been interested in his surrounding, curious about the implication of various phenomena, and methodical in his mustering of data, although these natural inclinations were fortified and refined by his instruction of William and Mary in the scientifically utilitarian precepts of the Scottish Enlightenment, nevertheless, it was likely Count Buffon's deprecating assertions that stirred Jefferson to science. In his influential History Naturale, Buffon claimed that mankind not only evolved more recently in the New World, but the climate and the native noxious environment produced a smaller and less virile forms of plant and animal life, and would even cause degeneration over time to those who immigrated from Europe. Jefferson was determined to prove by scientific and quantitative means that Buffon's theory was not only unsubstantiated, contrary to evidence. He determined that the only effective way to refute these claims was by a quantitative survey based on clear and objective data. Had Buffon's theories gone on unchallenged, the impact on immigration, trade, and exchange to the New World would have been disastrous. In the end, Jefferson's data was so conclusive that Buffon himself had to concede. The opportunity arose in 1780 when the Secretary of the French Legation, Francois Marbeau, requested statistical accounts from each American state concerning its resources. Jefferson seized on this opportunity to take the notes that he had been collecting over years, which he described as loose papers bundled up without order, marshaled them into a format that provided the information that Marbeau was requesting, but also at the same time to refute those charges of Buffon and some of the other respected naturalists in Europe. Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia became the most important scientific work produced by an American in the late 18th century. This is wonderful. I found this, well, I didn't find, they told me about it when I went up to the American Philosophical Society. They said, have you seen our copy of Jefferson's, that Jefferson presented to the Society, the notes on Virginia? And down here it's dated 1782, 3 years before any other known publication. That date may be an error. It might really be 1785. But nonetheless, it was one that Jefferson had obviously saved from the earliest times of publications. The notes on Virginia established the superiority in many cases, both in size and strength and in the fecundity of American species of plants, animals, humans, and the antiquity of American Indians, thus eviscerating the European claims of the degenerative effect of the environment of the New World. This aspect of Jefferson's investigations encompassed the studies of botany, zoology, archaeology, paleontology, meteorology, and comparative linguistics. Because of the limited time today, I'll only talk to two of these issues. The first has to do with public health and social architecture, and the second was secure methods of conveying sensitive diplomatic information. As disparate as the fields of architecture and public health may seem to be, they had a logical and utilitarian connection for Jefferson. The pandemic spread of smallpox in the 18th century was so great that it caused 10% of the deaths in Britain and disfigured at least a quarter of the population. In 1714, the ancient Chinese technique of inoculation called variolation was reported to the Royal Society. In 1718, the daughter of London socialite, Lady Mary Montagu, underwent inoculation and soon became widespread in both social and military circles. The process gained such currency that it was supported in New England by Cotton Mather in Boston in the 1720s. In 1759, Benjamin Franklin co-wrote with preeminent London physician William Heberden pamphlets on the beneficial effects of the vaccination. They were friends, both Franklin and Heberden were friends and colleagues of Jefferson's mentor, Small. Inoculation was also advocated at the University of Edinburgh, with Jefferson's kin and classmates, Arthur Lee, James McClure, Watt Jones, Thomas Tucker, Arthur Lee, all went to Aberdeen. In the archives of University of Edinburgh, the greatest concentration of American students came from two states, one of which was Pennsylvania, and the other of which was Virginia. And I am certainly, particularly from McClure and Arthur Lee and Watt Jones's attendance at Edinburgh under Small's old mentor, John Gregory, that Small sent his students, or recommended his students, to go to Edinburgh for a medical education, which was the finest in Europe at the time, and that from Pennsylvania, Benjamin Franklin did the very same thing. And here's old William Haberden, who later tried to get a job, or got him a job at the Royal Court in St. Petersburg, which Small turned down. When inoculation started to take place, there were passionate opinions concerning it. Some claimed it was against God's will to interfere with nature's course. Some thought that inoculation would bring on disease, and some believed that it was going to be of universal benefit. Jefferson among them. He took the advice of his classmate and Edinburgh graduate, George Gilbert, was inoculated in Philadelphia by another Edinburgh graduate, Shippen, in 1766. 30 years later, Edward Jenner found an inoculation that he discovered from a milder form of the pox called cowpox. But this inoculation would not only prevent cowpox and was non-fatal, but also would prevent smallpox. In America, Benjamin Waterhouse advocated this method, and Jefferson's backed up and supported him substantially by having his own family and servants inoculated with no ill effect. Another major disease that threatened Americans was the yellow fever. In 1793, a massive outbreak occurred in Philadelphia, killed 15% of the population, and caused another 20% to flee. Many of the Hamiltonians blamed the outbreak on the French fleeing from Haiti. Those of Jefferson Republicans insisted the cause was environment. However, Jefferson himself would not commit to one viewpoint or the other until he investigated the surrounding data. He concluded that the contagion is generated near the waterside in close-built cities under warm conditions. And to catch the disease, you must enter the local atmosphere. Infected persons going out of the district and nursed by their friends and family never communicate the disease. Therefore, it is epidemic and not contagious. His proposals to prevent this disease was to build cities on a checkerboard plan. The black squares being buildings and the white squares being left open for trees, fresh air, sunlight, and the like. This train of thought led Jefferson to his views on public architecture and the design of the University of Virginia. In 1750, much of London was caught up in what was called putrid or jail fever. It came from the infamous Newgate prison and spread first to the courts of law and then to much of metropolitan London. Many died from this infection. The disease was caused by unsanitary conditions, crowded conditions, and poor ventilation. The Court of Common Council ordered Newgate to be pulled in and a new prison to be erected in its place. Architect George Dance was chosen to present his vision, and the new institution provided a cleaner and healthier atmosphere along with a psychologically forbidding monolithic facade. So in Dance's version, you had open areas in the middle and cells that communicated to those open areas, fresh water, and the clientele of the prison divided into 3 separate areas, with the sick being in one area. While Jefferson and Franklin were stationed in Paris, there existed in the center of town a charity hospital founded in 651 by Archbishop Saint Landry. It rightly had the reputation as a death trap. It was densely populated. Patients lying 6 or 7 to a bed, stagnant air, dirty water, poor ventilation. Hygiene was appalling. Cross-contamination rampant. 1 in 4 who entered did not leave. And it was little wonder that it was known also as the gateway to hell, antechamber of death, or hotel mort. In 1772, it burnt to the ground. New construction began in the 80s after Franklin had departed, leaving Jefferson as head of the American mission. During its planning stages, Jefferson was in constant contact with many on the committee, John Sylvan Bailey, Jean-Baptiste Leroy, and Louise Gilliam Anta. It was during this time that the architectural seeds of the University of Virginia began to take root in Jefferson's mind. The Paris Academy decided to, instead of building one central hospital, to build 4 satellite hospitals around Paris, and they were to be founded on scientific principles. The hospitals were ordered to be constructed to accommodate 1,200 patients, be comprised of 12 pavilions with parallel lines along the main axis connected by covered walkways. At the head of the pavilion was a chapel to be constructed and gardens interspersed in between. During this time, Jefferson sought the advice of Leroy and Bailey in particular. As you note on this, the design for Leroy's hotel in 1788 and Jefferson's design for University of Virginia around 1815 are remarkably similar, almost the same. Going from general to specific, the original plans for the hospital in Paris at the top, in the center of everything was a church. Jefferson's church became the rotunda, which held the library. And you can see the similarities, even as remarked to me right before this lecture, 6 columns and 6 columns. The pavilions, almost identical. And the important part of this is Jefferson's views on public health led very much, particularly in the construction of the University of Virginia, its plan of open pavilions, covered walkways, a healthy atmosphere, a sound mind and a sound body for the students at that institution. Jefferson as the scientific spy. How am I doing on time?
It's 20 till.
Okay. For thousands of years, it's been to great advantage, particularly in military and diplomatic situations, to send messages to your cohorts in the field so that they're able to get the information, but your enemies are not able to interpret it. It was a highly sophisticated skill by the time of the Renaissance. The French developed a system that employed skilled mathematicians in the government bureau. The English and Austrians poured immense amounts of government funds into finding their encryption and decryption offices, and even in Renaissance Italy, Leonardo de Medici inventively instructed Sandro Botticelli to incorporate a secret message on his canvas of his painting Primavera. One of the earliest occurrences of espionage in the Revolution involved a fellow named Benjamin Thompson, who later became known as Count Rumford. Thompson developed a technique known as white ink. By this process, you would write on the paper, it would not show up. Later you would dust it and the print would come out. Thompson was discovered. He fled to the British, became a minister to the King of Bavaria, and later married Lavoisier's widow. 2 people important in American espionage was James J., John Jay's brother, who was a London physician, and Arthur Lee. And the favorite methods for the unsophisticated Americans were the transposition code, in which letters were shuffled, substitution code, in which one letter or number was substituted for another, and book codes, in which two correspondents using the same booklet transmit messages in the following way. The sender might send for the first word 312-17-4, the recipient would turn to the prearranged book to page 312, line 17, word 4. Dictionaries, for ease of use, were a favorite means of doing book codes. Two that Jefferson used quite a lot were in-text spelling dictionary and Boyer's French dictionary. This is an example of a nomenclature code in which numbers are written on a prearranged sheet, and you just send the numbers with commas between them to make out messages. This is a cipher code, and it's quite complex, but Jefferson and Patterson frequently use this, and Jefferson even recommended it above his cipher machine. Patterson and Livingston were three of the main exponents of that cipher code. And Franklin was one of the most skilled in encryption and decryption, and Adams one of the most inexperienced, and just hated the code. Abigail Adams wrote, "My poor friend hates the cipher." And so Jefferson, in order to communicate with Adams, developed something called a cipher wheel. And he based this, I think, on, during the time he and Franklin were in Paris, all the rage was dispatch box for diplomats called a letter lock. And you would just have a simple cylinder, 4 sets of letters that randomly went around. You'd form a word and the lock would open. And there's copies illustrating the book, and there's the actual one over here. Jefferson, on this principle, devised what's called the cipher code. And the evidence for it lay hidden in the Library of Congress and the Jefferson papers until 1922, when a Chaucer scholar by the name of Manley was in there digging around, and he happened upon it. And when he happened upon this description of a cipher code, it matched almost exactly to one that the Army was getting ready to dispense the very next week. It had been invented by, or the simple concept had been said to be invented by a guy named Bazier, a French military officer in 1890, a fellow named Captain Hitt, an American, improved upon it, and the final product turned out to be pretty much a smaller version than this, a pocket version, and made out of aluminum, but the principle was identical. And the principle is that there were 36 of these discs that went across. And on each disc, there was a series of letters. 2 recipients would have, or more, would have the identical same wheel. You would write out or line up the different discs to give out a message, attack at dawn, and put a dowel through it. And then just turn the wheel around and pick a line of random letters, send that to your recipient. The recipient would put a dowel through the random set of letters and turn the wheel around until he found a sentence that made sense. And it's just absolutely brilliant. This cipher wheel Elizabeth Chu up at Monticello alerted me to it, and it is in the National Cryptology Museum at Fort Meade, Maryland. And I went up there and took these pictures of them and got the story that it was bought by the former director, and I got on the phone and talked to him, and he bought it from an antique dealer. And the antique dealer bought it from an old lady in Charleston, West Virginia. And the antique dealer was trying to pass it off as a Belle-Meade Civil War cipher wheel that she had. And the fellow said that this lady was originally from Charlottesville. And the old director talked to the old lady, and she said that she had it in her attic as a child and was one of her favorite toys. She had no idea where it came from. And when the director brought it back to the museum, he thought that it might be a more ancient age in the Civil War, so he brought in experts from the Smithsonian, and they looked at it and dated it 1780 to 1800, which would have put it in perfect time for Jefferson. The letters which go around, this is a clear picture, but the letters which go around are a French alphabet. It's made out of pear wood, and like I said, it dates from the 1780s, 1790s. I personally, maybe romantically, but also these other directors of this museum, think that Jefferson may have had Regnier build this for him when he was in Paris, particularly because Adams was such a poor cipher keeper, and this would be something that would take care of that problem. I don't have any direct evidence, but I would like to see, and somebody came to speak to me about some Huguenot papers earlier today, see if I can get his friend to look through and see if there's any Regnier invoices that go to Jefferson. But I think this cipher wheel was actually belonged to Jefferson. The timing's right, the area of interest is right, and of course when Jefferson died, he was so broke that his family flogged off virtually everything. And I think it's not unlikely, although there's no proof, it's not unlikely this cipher wheel was in a yard sale and somebody picked it up. This is a Confederate cipher wheel that is only superficially like the other one, but you can see where the fellow got the idea. And this was owned by a Confederate captain from Leesburg, Virginia, Charles Hawkins Clagett. And he may have got this idea from Jefferson's cipher wheel or knowing those people as well. Of course, that's intense speculation on my part. Conclusion. For those who don't think that Jefferson was a scientist, these are two lists of his library and therefore reflect a lot of his interest. And in both instances, the only area that surpasses science is ethics. And a part of ethics in that time, the Scottish Enlightenment and Jefferson's categorizing was law. So I think that comprised a lot of the ethics part. His scientific publications, most people are unaware of. Some of the more interesting ones were Notes on the State of Virginia, a description of the mold board of least resistance, and a memoir on the discovery of certain bones of quadruped of the clawed kind in western Virginia, and of course Lewis and Clark. Scientific instruments that Jefferson had, which all again reflect his great range of scientific interests, and scientific honors that were bestowed upon Jefferson. thank you for your patience and indulgence, and I'll end this right now. There's, of course, in the book, other segments on paleontology, which is really very neat, on comparative linguistics and other things as well. So thank you very much for your time. Any time for questions?
Yes, we have time for a few questions.
Okay. Anybody would have any questions? Don't be shy. Yes, sir.
Just reinforce your idea about the cryptology. It was my impression when I was working on the period from the Revolution through the Louisiana Purchase that the New Englanders made scant use of cryptography and codes and ciphers and that sort of thing, and the Southerners and New Yorkers did much more. So I'm not surprised that Adams couldn't do it well. Madison practiced by taking shorthand notes in cipher, and Monroe could never figure it out.
Well, the problem with, in the interest in cryptology, particularly in that early age, is people were such nosepots. They would open up other people's letters all the time. As early as 1762, Jefferson's writing to Page about Shelton's tachographic alphabet, and they were writing, they'd leave spaces between words and invert letters and invert Greek letters, just for the purpose of thwarting somebody else's information. And in a lot of Jefferson's personal letters, you see a lot of the nomenclature type. In personal letters, all of a sudden there'll be a series of 4 or 5 series of numbers rather than letters. So it's obvious he's writing in code there. So this was a big problem then, and particularly in diplomatic affairs. For instance, Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson not only had to worry about the British getting hold of information he was transmitting across the seas, but also the French, and even more importantly, his opponents in Congress that he did not want to know what he was doing until it was a fait accompli. So that was a very interesting area in that time, and it's remarkable how much the Americans did, considering their relative unsophisticated state of encryption and decryption capabilities. Yes?
Did Jefferson ever act as a professor to students either at the UVA?
Did he ever act as what?
A professor of science. Did he ever take classes the students on and teach them science?
Not to my knowledge, no. He was, but like that initial poem, Jefferson saw himself as a scientist. He thought in mathematical, abstract mathematical terminology all the time. He constantly complained about having to be involved with politics. What he wanted to do was science and be left alone. But either pressures from other people because his capabilities were so great, or like Franklin said in his initial poem, his own ego got the better of him and he engaged in politics. Of course, for all his account keeping, Jefferson couldn't keep accounts. He was constantly broke, never had any money. It was only the goodwill of other people not wanting to collect on him that kept him from going belly up a long time before. Any other questions? Thank you all very much.